Before I begin this video, a rather long disclaimer on what this video is and what it isn't. This is not a video about establishing which way to play competitively is better. This is not me saying Smogon is better or VGC is better. I just think it's about time to look at the pros and cons of each with both objective and subjective observations. In the past year or so, there has been a lot of heat regarding this subject and making any fair comparisons or contrasts between the two ways to play competitively, and I don't think it should be that way. I don't think this kind of discussion topic should be controversial, and I really don't think that a few bad apples on each side should ruin it for the rest of us when it comes to this subject. Because many people want to know the individual unique qualities of each, and perhaps what VGC has over Smogon and what Smogon has over VGC. I think it's totally okay to talk about this. And really, I made this video in order to explain the fine details rather than just cop out and say, oh, well, Smogon is 6v6 singles and VGC is 4v4 doubles, and that's it. We're done. Because realistically, when most competitive players only end up really investing into one or the other, I think it's very important to make a video like this to inform newer players and lay this information out to them so they can choose which format is better for them. So now that I have that out of the way, now we can begin the video. Probably the best way for people to identify which of the two formats is best for them is laying out the pros and the cons of each one. So we're going to start out with VGC Pros, all of the good things that VGC has that is mostly unique to VGC. Well, the most obvious quality is that VGC is the official format of the Pokemon Company International. So if you're playing VGC, technically you can call yourself the most, I suppose, official competitive Pokemon player. It is the one that gets on the official streams and is endorsed by the official Pokemon Company. And this is pretty significant because a lot of the other pros that VGC has is of course attributed to the fact that they're backed by the official company. 4 vs 4 doubles is the name of the game at VGC, and that basically guarantees fast-paced, streamlined, exciting battles that won't drag on. In fact, stall is pretty much completely unviable in 4v4 doubles, so all of the frustrating aspects of stall in singles is basically eradicated, and you're just gonna get fast, quick-moving, exhilarating battles. By its very nature, VGC is centered towards live tournaments and live events, and let me tell you, even though I mostly identify as a Smogon player, I've gone to a few VGC events myself, and it's unlike anything that I've ever experienced just playing on Smogon, or even just experienced in general. It was such a great experience getting to go to a regionals, for example, and you'll make great IRL friends within the VGC community, and in general I feel like there's a more personal connection to meeting like-minded competitors in person rather than behind a username, for example. The spoils of doing well in big VGC tournaments are very real and tangible, such as scholarships, a nice looking trophy, or perhaps even a huge box of trading cards. And who doesn't love trading cards? Who doesn't love Pokemon trading cards? Even if you don't actually know how to play the game, they're cool to look at. The holograms are cool, the drawings are cool. If you're really dedicated to competing in VGC, you'll probably get to travel quite a lot, especially if you're winning a lot of these tournaments. You get to travel to go to nationals, travel to go to worlds, or perhaps just traveling to go to other regionals to gather up championship points. And honestly, the strong presence of an IRL in-person community with VGC is probably one of the biggest selling points for playing this format. And the last big pro that I'm going to mention for VGC is honestly something that I feel like many players overlook, or even think is something that's a negative for VGC, and that is the Bring 6 Pick 4 format and its benefits. When you combine the Bring 6 Pick 4 aspect that VGC has always had with the more recent Team Preview edition in Generation 5, I feel like this somewhat inhibits some of the team matchup issues that 6v6 singles has, or just 6v6 formats as a whole, and I'll get into more detail about that when we discuss the Smogon part of this video. But basically with Bring 6 Pick 4, it adds an extra layer of decision making and skill to deciding what Pokemon you're going to bring in Team Preview, and it will help you recover from perhaps a team matchup disadvantage before the game even starts. And in general, it just seems like a very strange thing for a matchup to happen where a player can bring a combination of 4 of their Pokemon that will beat any combination of their opponent's 6. Though of course, Bring 6 Pick 4 plus Team Preview only inhibits the team matchup issue in Pokemon and doesn't eliminate it completely. The issue of team-based advantages are still very present in VGC, but typically they're not as extreme as they can be in 6v6 formats, and again, the decisions you have to make in Team Preview will at least give you the chance to recover before you're thrust into the game. So I definitely do feel that Bring 6 Pick 4 in VGC contributes to a more fun competitive experience. So now we're going to talk about some of the things that perhaps hurt VGC or are cons that can perhaps turn people away. And the first thing is that it's very much a spend money to make money kind of situation in VGC. I did mention getting to travel as a pro in the first section, and I also mentioned that you can make some big money off of winning VGC events, but in order to get to that phase, you're going to have to make a little bit of an investment, especially when it comes to traveling if you're just living in the middle of nowhere, Texas. By the way, that's me. And it certainly takes a certain amount of passion for the game to be willing to spend either plane ticket money or gas money on going out to the really big events, where perhaps you will find your fame in the VGC scene. There is some good news more recently about this for people who find this to be a big factor in their decision making, in that more recently the Pokemon Company International has been a little bit more conscious of spreading out premier challenges across all areas and giving everyone a chance to accumulate some championship points without necessarily traveling 100 or 200 miles. Another con is that support on the most popular simulator, Pokemon Showdown, can be pretty scarce. There is a VGC ladder, well, it's a battle spot doubles ladder as it's called now. The competition there just really isn't the same. It's not at its highest level, so immediate practice for VGC may not always be as accessible. You're probably better off just hooking up on your DS and going on the battle spot ladder, which brings me to the next point. Wi-Fi battling can be pretty slow, especially if you are used to the fast-paced Pokemon Showdown way of battling. However, the 3D animations are very pretty, and the fact that it's a 4v4 doubles format does help alleviate the lengthy turns on the 3DS. While the 4v4 doubles format is in some ways a big pro for VGC, the fact that there is no sanctioned singles option can be kind of a turnoff to old school and casual fans that are perhaps coming back to the game and are more familiar with the singles format that they played as a kid in the in-game storyline experience, the single-player experience. For those of you seeking an online community for VGC players, Nugget Bridge Forums definitely has your back there, and I don't have anything against them in particular. I'm not saying that they're a bad forum by any means, but especially when compared to their Smogon counterpart, sometimes I feel rather, limited, especially when I'm on the mobile version of the site. The sections that the forum is broken up into are not particularly attractive and are very general compared to the Smogon counterpart. Don't get me wrong, the Nugget Bridge main site is an excellent resource for those seeking VGC material online, but in terms of the actual Nugget Bridge forums, there is definitely a little bit of room to improve in terms of engagement. I feel like the Nugget Bridge forums aren't as engaging as their Smogon counterparts. That's what I'm trying to say. On the surface, it just looks like there's not a whole lot to do, and really the Nugget Bridge forums don't actually have a need to be as detailed and meticulous as the Smogon forum, simply because a lot of the VGC interactions are IRL anyway. That's the main point of it in a lot of ways. And the last con that I will list out for VGC are the season-to-season rule sets. And while the dramatic differences between the rule sets of each season or year do serve to keep the format relatively fresh, sometimes the rule sets and ban lists can come off as frustratingly arbitrary, and they're static, which means once you set the rules at the beginning of the year, they will not change until the end of the year. So really, it's kind of hit or miss depending on your personal tastes, and while there have been a lot of VGC formats in the past and this year's that I like, remember the time when we allowed Groudon and Palkia to be in standard play? Or how about the time that we banned like over 300 Pokemon because they were unobtainable with the little Pentagon thingy in X and Y? And if you think that was a little bit off-putting, how about the time that we banned everything except for Unova native Pokemon? So that's like 150 Pokemon. And because the rules are static, even when Game Freak themselves admits that a couple of Pokemon are too powerful to begin with, if one of these rule sets unintentionally centralizes the metagame even more towards those powerful Pokemon, and I'm specifically talking about 2014 and Mega Kangaskhan here, the Pokemon Company won't change the rules mid-season, well, because they just don't. They just don't do it. That's just not how they do it. And really, this is the big reason why Bring 6 Pick 4 is so important in VGC. Otherwise, the team matchup problems would be unbearable. And now we move on to the Smogon side of this video. And first, we're going to kick off with the Smogon Pros, the things that are good and unique to the Smogon format in comparison to VGC. The first thing that needs to be talked about when talking about the advantages of playing Smogon is the amazing simulator support. It is probably the source of the most big selling point of playing Smogon. Pokemon Showdown, probably the most played and most popular simulator today, is a simulator made by Smogon for Smogon. That's the best way to put it. And although Pokemon Showdown certainly does support formats outside of Smogon, 95-96% of the time, if you're playing on Pokemon Showdown, you're playing on Smogon ladders or Smogon tournaments. That's just the way it is. And really, the quickness of Pokemon Showdown and how it conducts battles is what really offsets what would otherwise be very slow and sluggish 6v6 single battles. And along with that comes the amazing convenience of having all online-based tournaments on the Smogon forums, including all of the major ones. So if you have the time and the talent, you can become the world champion of 6v6 singles without moving an inch off your ass. The great and helpful online community and the attractive Smogon forums is really what sells the Smogon format in the end. I mean, you go into these forums and you can just get lost at the amount of content and the amount of things to do right off the bat, even as a new user. And part of the reason there's so much to do on these forums ties into the next pro of Smogon, the blessing of the tier system. It's really just a tragic misconception that people have about the tier system, that it's somehow limiting or something that dictates what Pokemon you can and can't use, when really it's the exact opposite. With the tier system in place, it means that there's a place for more than just the objectively best Pokemon at Smogon. If your favorite Pokemon in the entire world is Samurott, and you want to play competitively with Samurott, there's a place for that at Smogon. It's called the NU tier, where Samurott kicks ass. And the tier system just opens up opportunities for perhaps substandard favorites to be used in a competitive environment well, rather than always having to use the objectively best Pokemon to consistently win battles. And before somebody brings up the Pachirisu thing in VGC 2014, Sejun Park didn't use Pachirisu because it was necessarily his favorite Pokemon. Pachirisu had an established niche that was established well before Sejun used it in VGC Worlds. And if you look at the rest of Sejun's team from that year, it was pretty much par for the course by that time for VGC 2014. Don't get me wrong, I'm not taking any credit away from Sejun Park for using Pachirisu in the World's Tournament. I'm just saying, don't use that as the absolute for setting VGC at the same level as Smogon in terms of opportunities for diversity. And really, that's all it comes down to on this particular quality where Smogon has an edge over VGC. It's the diversity of formats. Despite VGC technically having multiple formats as well, each season is a completely different metagame. I'll give you an example, alright? How many people in the VGC community are still playing VGC 2011 or 2010? Well, actually, I don't know. I could be completely wrong on this, but I don't imagine there's a whole lot of demand for that when the main focus is on VGC 2015. But are Smogon players still playing 4th Gen OU, 5th Gen OU, even Advanced OU in tournaments? Hell yes, they are. In addition to the various tiers within one generation that are all completely different and diverse metagames, there's also the past generations that are still actively played. And finally, the last big pro that Smogon has is, of course, they're well known for their dynamic rule sets and ban policies that make a conscious effort to favor the philosophy of the more skilled player should always win. If the leaders of a certain tier or metagame identify a potentially unfair element of the game, it will go through either a quick ban process or sort of a trial process called the suspect test in order to determine whether the element is unfair and can potentially rob the more skilled player of the win. For 6v6 singles, this is a quality that is especially important as we go down to the cons of playing Smogon. Team matchup sucks in 6v6. Unfortunately, Smogon doesn't have an absolute remedy yet for the increasing amount of threats that are introduced every generation of Pokemon, other than just banning things and eliminating the unfair elements of the game. To somewhat pacify the amount of threats that you have to deal with when playing 6v6, but especially now in ORAS, it's a little bit scary just how many matchups there are in which you can just feel completely helpless due to team matchup, where no matter how flawlessly you play, there is still a good chance that you will lose. Because the opponent's team is either extremely prepared for anything that your Pokemon can throw at them, or your team is unprepared for a lot of the things that the other team can bring to the table. And when you don't have the extra layer of decision making from Team Preview because you're already forced to bring all 6 of your Pokemon, then it can be very hard to recover from a team matchup disadvantage compared to VGC, as I discussed earlier. The second big con of Smogon is something that people like to harp on a lot, and it's definitely present, but I don't really think it's a Smogon exclusive thing as much as it is just an internet thing, and that's the toxicity of ladder play in general and sometimes a portion of the community. And it's the internet, dude. You're gonna run into assholes out there, especially when it's very easy to hide behind a username and you are completely anonymous. Without online interaction though, there is no Smogon, so for some, this is a pressing concern to them. The next con is that basically the Wi-Fi support it's basically non-existent. Everything that happens on Smogon typically happens through Pokemon Showdown, so you're not going to get the little pretty animations, you're not going to get to use all of the perfectly bred Pokemon on your 3DS for the most part. You can most definitely play with Smogon rules on the 3DS with your personal friends. However, if you ask an opponent in a major tournament to play you on the 3DS, typically the response will be, huh? What? Wait, I just beat the Elite Four and left it at that. What is this? Not to mention the Wi-Fi forums themselves on Smogon, in my opinion, are just a complete mess. There's no reason to visit them over just visiting either a Facebook community or using a VGC resource or a Cerebi resource for all of your Wi-Fi needs. The next con is probably something that you've already become very aware of, and that is the lack of tangible, quote-unquote, real prizes for winning major tournaments in Smogon. It's all for the glory, it's all for the pixels, and all for the bragging rights. And I don't know, I guess there's just something about having a real trophy in your hands rather than a little PNG file under your username depicting a trophy. More recently, I think there was like one tournament that actually offered a prize money, but even then it was a pretty small amount, and I don't think that's something that's going to be catching fire anytime soon. The next two cons are sort of 2 in 1 as they're very closely intertwined. The first one is that some of the major tournaments tend to be sort of exclusive, and just the tournament scene in general can be a bit exclusive. It's very hard for a newbie to sort of get in without displaying an extraordinary amount of talent. And last time that happened, well, people who know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about. Forum activity and IRC activity is essential when trying to get drafted for SPL, the main team-based tournament that comes to mind in which you need to be drafted. And I don't know, I personally, I think I'm kind of biased on this one because I just find IRC painful as a way of communicating. I very much prefer Skype. But more than anything at Smogon, in addition to doing well in the actual battles, I think it's very important to make a name for yourself by posting on the forums. And for some, this can be kind of a chore. And the last con to choosing Smogon is that it is English speakers only. Now, by no means is Smogon not international. We get people from all over the world, but you just gotta speak English. I originally wasn't going to include this, mainly because if you're listening to this video, you probably don't have this problem. But then it occurred to me how it alienates the Japanese Pokemon community, which is of course a huge demographic we're talking about here, considering Pokemon is from Japan. And in terms of VGC, Japan consistently puts out some amazing players. So to me, it's just a little bit sad that if you're born and raised in Japan, you are most likely just not playing Smogon ever. Probably haven't even heard of it. To wrap this up, we're going to be making a side-by-side comparison of what I think are the most significant pros and cons of each way to play competitively from the ones I mentioned in this video already. The Smogon pros that I think are the most significant are strong Pokemon Showdown support that creates easily accessible practice from your computer, the engaging online forums and community, the presence of the tier system and dynamic rule sets, and of course the 6v6 singles format, the original format of Pokemon that I think the majority of fans are more familiar with. And on the VGC side, we have that it's the official format of Pokemon. This is the competitive format that is officially backed by the Pokemon Company International. Earlier in this video, I mentioned the benefits of 4v4 doubles, faster battles, and bring 6 pick 4, which inhibits some of the problems with team matchup that have been arising recently as we keep adding more and more Pokemon. And the next two pros are that, first of all, you get real and tangible prizes for winning big tournaments, whether it's getting scholarships, getting your travel paid for the next tournament, getting a nice trophy, and so on and so forth. And the presence of live events to begin with. Like I stated earlier, it's like nothing that you'll experience just playing online. And the most significant cons on the Smogon side, like I mentioned earlier, the team matchup issues that arise from having a 6v6 format with the recent adding of just more and more threats. The toxicity of the internet that is definitely more applicable to Smogon since most, if not all, interactions are online. The lack of the tangible prizes that VGC offers for winning their big tournaments, and the lack of Wi-Fi/3DS support. On the VGC side is the very minimalistic amount of simulator support, and I just don't think that the Pokemon Showdown Battle Spot Doubles Ladder has the highest level of competition just yet. The arbitrary and static rule sets that are set by the Pokemon Company International, and I went more in depth on why this is a con earlier in that section of the video. The next con is traveling to major events can sometimes be a little bit daunting for perhaps younger players who don't have the resources to consistently travel to the big events, the nationals, the worlds, etc. And the last major con is that VGC really only has one active metagame at a time that is in demand to be played, compared to the Smogon side where there is a consistent demand both for metagames from past generations and in general. They just have more metagames for each generation than VGC does. So in conclusion, if you enjoy the idea of going out to live events and getting to see your opponents face to face, you enjoy being heavily rewarded for your efforts and talents, and you enjoy the idea of playing on the 3DS, then perhaps the official format of Pokemon is the one for you. However, if you prefer the 6v6 singles format that Pokemon was founded on, and you enjoy the accessibility of Pokemon Showdown and other simulators, and you have an affinity for playing with your favorites, then perhaps a Smogon metagame is worth looking at. So that is all for this video. If you think I got something wrong or I missed something, go ahead and please leave a comment down below, leave a like, maybe subscribe, and also comment on what you would like for me to talk about next.